So welcome to the Student Activism Panel, Where Are They Now? I'm Dr. Arki. I'll be your moderator for today. I serve as the founder and the program director of the Ellipsis Institute for Women of Color in the Academy. I also have an opportunity to be a professor and the interim director of the Center for Pan-African Culture at Kent State University in the Department of Pan-African Studies. This semester, I have an opportunity to teach a course entitled Black Lives Matter. And as a part of our coursework, we're in our third module. I wanted to take a little bit of a pause from the writing that we've been doing and the conversations that we've been having internally and turn that into an external conversation, bring in other folks so we can really begin to expand our critical analysis and think about the work that we're doing now and how that work can really or should really be translating into the future. So we'll start with a brief introduction from me about our three panelists, and then we'll move into some questions. We have about 3 standard questions that we'll ask our panelists. This is really designed to have conversation between the panelists and the students. So welcome to all of the students who are here. Welcome to our group on Facebook. We're so excited that you're here, and we'll get started. So our first panelist that we'll introduce is Dr. Alice Ragland, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Cristo Rey High School in Columbus, Ohio. I had the privilege of meeting Allison as a student activist. I met her when she was in high school. And one of the first activism stories, and I love sharing the story, I don't know, she might be mad at me, so I'm gonna share it. But this was, I was running out of school time programs for young folks, and there was a dress code that was enforced at her high school. And being the young activist that she was at that time, really pushing the boundaries of the dress code and not pushing in a negative way, but really holding the line for Black girls, women, and femmes. When there's a standard issue dress that comes out, we are the ones that get pinged the most because of the way that our bodies are made. And so even in that system, she's done lots of activism between now and then, and she can tell you about it. But that's one of the early activisms that I saw her be a part of. And from that moment, I was like, oh yeah, look at her, she's doing it. And to see the work that she's doing now and to read her publications and to see her in life as a woman, a wife, and a mom is really, really exciting. So I'm excited to have Dr. Ragland here with us. Next, we have Michaela Hayford, who is a second-year law student at Case Western Reserve University. I met Michaela as an undergrad at Case, where I was doing some work in the Center for Women there, really at the beginning of the Ellipsis Institute. And Michaela was a part of a movement called We Belong Here, creating space on campus for folks who identify as people of color, for folks who identify as Black, for folks who identify as other. Really at the forefront of that movement, leading the African American student group on campus, producing events, having protests, partnering with other organizations, partnering with faculty and staff on campus. And one of the highlights of her work is the dorm that was built on campus. There's a new residence hall. And because of the work that Michaela did, the residence hall was named after Stephanie Tubbs Jones. And Stephanie Tubbs Jones is important to the Cleveland community, the greater Cleveland community. She's a Black woman who has been in politics for over 30 years. And you used to be able to see her in the streets, riding down the street. In my early career, her office was in the same building that I worked in. So I would see her walking down the hall and she always had the smile, which we hear so much about. She always had that smile. And she was a fearless leader for not just Black people, not just Clevelanders, not just folks in Northeast Ohio, but for Black women. And so to have Michaela stand the line and hold the line and create that legacy at that particular institution that's predominantly white is really important. So thank you for that, Michaela. And then last, we have Amanda King. Amanda King is the founder and the creative director of Shooting Without Bullets. And she will tell you a little bit more about Shooting Without Bullets. I'll let her explain it to you. But our origin story is very similar. When I was working at Case Western Reserve, I had an opportunity to attend one of the events that was a part of the We Belong Here movement. And I remember being in the session and it's a PWI. There's not a lot of folks of color, not a lot of Black women, and I can't even remember who the facilitator was, but the facilitator said something, and it was one of those times where you look around the room and see if anybody else heard that. And I caught her eye, and from there we began to develop this relationship, and we have been on the ground running with Shooting Without Bullets ever since. It's been 4 years for Shooting Without Bullets, and I'm really proud of the work that she is doing also. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, and I'll allow you to introduce yourself. And also, I want to hear a little bit about your experience as an activist, as a student activist. So do you consider yourself a Black Lives Matter activist? And if you do, why? And if you don't, why not? So that's how we'll get started. And we'll start with Dr. Ragland.
Hey everyone, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Arki. I definitely do consider myself a Black Lives Matter activist. It looks very different now though. So when I was a student, or undergrad through like pre-kids student, I think that a lot of my work was more so focused on organizing and being out in the streets and putting together different protests and demonstrations. One of the earliest things that I remember doing is just putting together like a recycling program in my high school because we didn't have one, and I had been trying to get one from freshman year, and I emailed the board and I told them, you need to get this together. The earth is dying. Why aren't we recycling here? Because I started off in environmental activism before racial justice activism. So they ignored and ignored and ignored. So I remember stealing a bunch of trash cans out of the different janitor's closets in the building that weren't being used. And I said, we're recycling now. So that was like, it was kind of more guerrilla activism before I learned about like systems, before I learned about systems of oppression. So then when I got to college, and especially in my master's program, I learned a lot more about systems of oppression. And one of the biggest things that had an influence on me in terms of becoming a Black Lives Matter activist was the Trayvon Martin shooting, and especially when George Zimmerman was found innocent during that shooting. So I did not realize that that's something that could happen, even though I had some consciousness about racism. Again, my focus was a lot of environmental things, but I didn't understand the magnitude of systemic racism in the U.S. at the time. So I started learning more about that. I think that that really broke me in a way. I think my mom, I remember crying on the phone with my mom after that happened, and she said, um, she basically, I'm trying to put my headphones in, see if it be less noisy in the background. So I remember um, going back to my mom and just crying, and she had been through that. You know, she had been older when the Rodney King situation happened and when other iterations of this have happened in the past. So she was not quite as, she was upset, but she wasn't quite as surprised as I was. So I definitely, like I said, it broke me. I was sprayed a huge sign that said, justice, no peace, and put it on my balcony where I was living at the time in Athens because I went to OU. And then I just remember just starting to organize marches and getting with different organizations that organized big marches and big protests. And then when I went back to Cleveland for a year after finishing my master's program, that was my primary focus, was just getting people into the streets, getting people downtown Cleveland. Because then we had Tamir Rice being shot and killed by a police officer. And again, the verdict was that he was not guilty. It just the same situations happen over and over. We had many of those situations happening in Cleveland. So that is what my primary focus was then. There are some things that I realized back then that have influenced what I chose to do now. One thing is that there was a lack of education and information. It seemed
in the general public about systemic racism, and also within our own movement about systemic racism. I remember being in these meetings where we're planning, we're up until midnight, just trying to figure out what our next steps are. And we were kind of spinning our wheels because I don't think we all have the same level of understanding of how deep this issue is and how historically situated the issue of anti-Black violence is. So we, sometimes some people will be coming up with things like, well, maybe we should just focus on getting someone fired or getting someone in jail. Then you have some people that are like, well, they're prison abolitionists. So now we have not the same understanding across the issue. And I think that weakened the overall movement. And I think that doing things like free schools, teachings became really important to me because it allowed an opportunity to really delve into that historical context. Because when we're so focused on doing the work every single day and getting these different things passed, sometimes that fell by the wayside. So really having that time to do that deeper work, it had a big impact. I'm forgetting the second part of the question.
No, that was it. It was just, do you identify as a Black Lives Matter activist? Why or why not? And I think.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have not said all of that. Yes. The answer is yes.
It's okay. Right. Thank you, Dr. Ragland. Next, we'll hear from Michaela.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Michaela, and I think Dr. Arki did a really good job of kind of explaining, like, that story that she shared about We Belong Here was kind of my introduction into student activism. And maybe before that, well, so I'll start. I came to Cleveland from Kansas City, and that's where my family is. And it was a big change coming here. And I would say that before I started undergrad, I really wasn't knowledgeable on a lot of issues that were going on in the world. But I think Cleveland has a way of, when you get here, you have to confront it. And I know, like, there are some articles that came out talking about, like, how it's probably one of the most difficult cities to be a Black woman. And I think I confronted that very early on when I got here, but didn't necessarily have the educational background and skills and just knowledge to understand the systems that were at play. But in my second year of undergrad, I remember attending this security panel. So there were all these questions about safety on campus, and some students don't feel safe. And so they had actually hired a security consultant to come and meet with students and just kind of learn, I guess, what the students wanted in order to feel safe. And so it just sounded fishy to me. So I showed up, and what the students were saying was, it was absolutely ridiculous, and it was racist. And it was, I just see this consultant kind of taking notes, and also, like, kind of leveraging a lot of, like, racist assumptions about Cleveland and also about Case Western students. So I just took notes, and I remember sharing those notes with one of my really good friends, Destiny, who was the president of the African American Society at the time. And then she was like, we're gonna do, like, we have to do something, we're gonna do something. And then kind of from that, a lot of activism got put in motion, and a lot of, like, coalition building got put in motion with other student organizations, and just, like, kind of finding out what was going on campus. So ever since then, I've kind of been involved in, I would say, student activism. Would I say that I'm a Black Lives Matter activist? I don't think so. And the reason I would say that is because, of course, I support Black Lives Matter. And if there's a protest or if they need something from me, like, of course, yes. But I think because I'm not necessarily part of the organizing and decision-making, I don't show up to meetings and things like that. I would never want to, like, kind of co-opt what the work that they're doing and the efforts that are being made in the organizing to say that I'm a Black Lives Matter or, like, activist at this point. So, but that, that could change depending on, of course, if how I engage with them. But at this point, I would say no.
Awesome. Thank you, Michaela. Amanda.
Hey y'all, I'm Amanda King. creative director of Shooting Without Bullets. And my activism journey started in high school, actually, before Black Lives Matter existed. I was at a majority white, all girls high school, and I was going through my individual experience as a teenager and being a Black girl and dealing with teenage life. And I was dealing with a lot of internal things in my family. I am the child of an incarcerated parent, and I was kind of going through what that life was like in a majority white high school. And I didn't have outlets to express myself. I would say that my parents are a mix between like Pan-African parents and respectability politics parents. And so we talked a lot about race, we talked a lot about white supremacy, and we talked a lot about Black power, but we also talked about how you move through the world. And how you move through the world is to be competitive, to be gracious, and don't put all your business out there in the streets. And so I didn't really have a lot of outlets to express what it was like to see the fabric of my family torn apart by the criminal justice system. And so the only outlet that I had to express myself was art. I picked up a camera in high school. I had to take photography as an elective. And I just remember that this tool became like a weapon and a means to express the rage and anger that I was feeling, but that I had to suppress in order to be a Black girl navigating society. And so I started talking a lot about race within visual language. And then I started getting into student organizing. So around the time when I was in high school, the buzzwords were diversity. So I founded a diversity committee with Kelsey Carter, who is the impact director of Shooting Without Bullets, and we did student organizing. We were holding the institution accountable. We were creating space for Black girls to cathartically express our feelings. We were bringing in what seemed like radical thinkers back then, like Jane Elliott. For white people, Jane Elliott was radical. And so I did that. And in college, I was still, again, thinking critically about race. And even though I did also go to a majority white college, Bryn Mawr College, and then later law school, Case Western, in these spaces, I knew that I was a Black person, but I knew that I couldn't maintain the status quo, and that if there was something uncomfortable or there was something was not right, not only for myself but for other people, I wanted to advocate for change. And so I did that a lot. As far as being a Black Lives Matter activist, and of course my activist career is kind of longer. I mean, I did organizing at Case Western. Michaela and I organized against the riot police being in the barracks of Case Western during the Republican National Convention, and got some splash and some headway there, and basically the students were allowed to relocate at the expense of Case Western, and I thought that was very much progress for our institution. I joined the police commission in law school. I thought that would be a means to change state-sanctioned violence from the inside, and it didn't end well for me. I did not like the system. I felt like it was being co-opted, and I actually, it wasn't even co-opted. It wasn't designed to succeed from the beginning, and the police were infiltrating it since day one because they had the most power on that commission. But I've tried to, in response to Black Lives Matter issues, I've tried to activate around. And at the end of the day, it is art where I feel strongest in my organizing, and where I think I can spread messages most pervasively. But I would say that student activism has been a natural part of my journey, and that the Black Lives Matter movement absolutely has inspired my activism work. Before Black Lives Matter, I was not calling myself an activist. And so I think that what the Black Lives Matter movement did for young Black girls like myself was it made it okay to say I'm an activist, and in fact, it became a duty.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. We'll go into our next question. I just want to remind folks, you can drop your questions now in the chat box, whether you are in the Zoom webinar with us or watching live on Facebook. Please drop them when they come, and then we'll get to them as we can. The next question I have for our panelists is, I'd like you to tell a little bit more about your proud moment. So would you be able to share a proud moment as an activist, and then also share a painful moment as an activist?
I can go first. I think that one proud moment was, I remember meeting with a group that I worked with in Cleveland called Stop Mass Incarceration, Puncture the Silence. And I was also organizing with the Ohio Student Association in Cleveland, and it was after Tamir Rice was murdered. But we met as a group trying to figure out what to do. You know, nobody really knew what to do. So we decided as a collective to just start posting about, like, come downtown, we're going to have a protest downtown. And we didn't know really what to expect. There wasn't a lot of, you know, we didn't have a lot of people in our organization, so we didn't really know what to expect. So we went down there a little bit early and everything. And I remember that day, there were so many people down there. There were so many people. We ended up blocking off an intersection at Public Square. And I think that was a proud moment for me, just because we really didn't know what the heck to do. We were just like, something terrible has happened and we need to do something. We didn't have a lot of, you know, pre-planning or organization around it, but we felt like something has to happen. And some of the other panelists have mentioned, Cleveland is not an easy space to be a Black woman or to be an activist. There's a lot of things going on there. So I think that just the fact of seeing that many people out was something I had never seen before. I had never seen it before, because a lot of stuff happens in Cleveland, but, you know, having people come out to the streets like that in those large of numbers was very new. So I think that just having that awareness and having, like, I guess, the bravery not to really care as, you know, who's going to show up, how many people are going to be here, what if nobody comes, just like being able to step up and say, I don't care if 5 people come here, and then having hundreds of people come. That was definitely a proud moment for me. I think that one of my most painful moments is something that I remember before I started organizing more demonstrations and protests and things like that. It was the day of the George Zimmerman verdict. I think I was just finishing undergrad that year, and that year I was a resident assistant. I had started paying more attention to certain ways that I was being treated as one of the very few Black people on the campus of Ohio University. And but I had a great relationship with my residents. Pretty much everyone on my floor was white, but they always were very nice and kind toward me. So on the day of the verdict, I remember a lot of us followed each other on Twitter. I was very, very upset. So I was on Twitter saying all kinds of things. I was on Twitter saying all kinds of things that I was just venting my frustration on Twitter. I was just venting my frustration that he was not found guilty. And then one of my residents, who I actually liked, I knew that she was definitely different political ideology than myself, but we never had any major issues. So she tweeted, not directly toward me, but just in general, she tweeted, I think that the jury made the right decision. Haters gonna hate. And that really hurt me because I felt like we had been growing this relationship throughout this whole year. We had been, you know, joking around together. We kind of joked around about our different political ideologies that we had, but it was never anything harsh. So my first thought was, if she's able to just brush it off and say something like, as frivolous as haters gonna hate about some young person's life being taken away from them, like that very easily could have been a brother of mine if I had a brother, or a cousin or something. Like he could easily be related to me, you know? And I think that when that kind of thing happens, all Black people do have that shaken up feeling, because it's a devastation for all of us. And for the people who are the closest to them, it's the most devastating, but we all feel it as a community. So I think that that really, really was painful for me, but it also taught me how it gave me some more insight into how whiteness operates, because a lot of people don't understand that it's not just about somebody just being blatantly mean to you. It's more sinister than that. It's more of an underlying thing. And I think that racial bias that came out in that way, it showed me that, you know, it just made me question, if something happened to me or to someone close to me, then what would the response be from her, from somebody who I thought I had a good relationship with, you know? So I think that it taught me a lot, but it was also very hard to experience that.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Anyone else want to jump in on this question?
I can. A proud moment. I mean, I think every day being dedicated to this work, going to bed at night feeling intense frustration, waking up the next day and doing it again, that's a proud moment for me every single day. No win is too small. No burden is too heavy yet. And so I'm proud of that. I think one of the proudest moments, as far as I think what you would consider Black Lives Matter organizing, is when the officer Timothy Loman, who Ali mentioned, was not indicted for the murder of Tamir Rice. He basically went around trying to find employment at other police departments and ended up being hired from a police department in Bel Air, Ohio. And during that time, I was working with Miss Samaria Rice, the mother of Tamir Rice. And she was devastated at this prospect that Loman would be out on the street with a gun policing any other community after he murdered her son. And so quickly, within a day or so of finding the news, Ms. Rice was in Washington, D.C., and I was here in Cleveland, and we organized basically a campaign where we had folks call into Bel Air and shut the phone systems down at both the mayor's office and the police department. And within 3 hours, I remember, like, you couldn't get through the line. And the next day, Ms. Rice and her attorneys and myself and Kareem of Black Lives Matter and Latanya, we held a press conference, and about 15 minutes later, we got a call from Bel Air saying that they were not going to hire Loman. So that as far as organizing was a really, really pivotal and important moment. But I think that, you know, I run an organization, Shooting Without Bullets, which is an artistic activism organization for young Black and Brown artists, 13 to 21 years old. And, you know, when we started, and Michaela and Shamara were involved in its inception and its start. And when those young people came to us, many of them are still in the organization, they were shy, they wanted to talk about their experience because it was heavy. This was around the time where Tamir was murdered. It couldn't be but 2 years later. They were very much impacted, but they didn't have the space to necessarily process it. And so I did Shooting Without Bullets programming, which is a mix of arts education and I would say political education. And 4 years later, they're talking about these issues like that. I mean, they're putting it in their work. Their hip hop lyrics are incredibly strong and on point with the social climate and systemic racism. And so to see them not only be able to critically think about these issues, but to naturally speak on it, and to use their platforms to further the sentiment of Black Lives Matter movement. That's something that I'm proud of. Something that I'm not not a proud, but like heavy moments are those moments of tension and conflict within movement. There's a lot of trust issues here, a lot of trust issues. And I understand we're dealing with systemic racism. We're dealing with people taking from us, abusing us, exploiting us. But I think that this lack of trust within movement builders does tear down and hinder progress within movement. And I can say that I have given a lot to fighting against state sanctioned violence in Cleveland, I would say. And I really, at each time that I was fighting outwardly, I have to admit that I was fighting inwardly too, because the trust just wasn't there. And it was coming from a place where it was hindering my ability to actually organize. And so that wasn't a proud moment. There are like outward facing things that are like, yay, you did that, girl, congrats. But like internally, like I'm still dealing with PTSD from that shit. Like I'm still recuperating from years of just the abuse that comes from the struggle, I would say.
Thanks. That was really honest. That's something that we don't like to talk about in public, but if you can't name it, then you can't change it. And so we've got to be able to name it. We've got to be able to talk about how this affects us and the work that we're doing, I want to say, intersectionally. So in our course, we just finished up a unit that focused on intersectionality. And I want to, before we get the questions that are coming in the chat, these are great. This is the last question I'm going to ask, and then we'll move to the questions in the chat. So keep dropping them in. I want to talk a little bit about intersectionality. And maybe you can share a few of the ways that you identify and how your intersectional identity helps to keep you grounded. Because that's kind of what it sounds like. I heard you say, Amanda, just, reaching back to the other parts of yourself and remembering those and centering yourself as an activist is one piece of my identity. But so yeah, share us a little bit more about your identity and how you use intersectionality as a tool to help ground you in your activism work. Anyone can jump in.
I can jump in. I think intersectionality has been like really, really helpful, especially as being a student at Case, where there are like very, very few, especially in the law school, very few Black women that are there. And so it's like, in order to have, sometimes you need critical mass and you need people, and intersectionality has been a way to like pull more people in where, if I can get you to identify with one of these issues, like potentially you'll be part of it. So when there's only 6 of us in the law school, like, but we need maybe 50 people or something like that, then it's, unfortunately, I guess, playing on the way that where our oppression is linked, and you can, a lot of times people maybe identify more with their oppression than with their privilege. And so just trying to create coalitions that way, I think has been successful and sometimes, yeah, and a source of power.
Thank you, Michaela. Anyone else want to jump in?
I can speak. I think that I've noticed in different activist spaces that I've been in that it was a lot of different identities weren't being acknowledged. So like in a lot of environmental justice spaces before, it's becoming more and more common for me to experience people of color in spaces and in their own environmental justice spaces. But previously, especially when I was doing that kind of work in college, it was extreme. I would be like the only person of color in these organizations and in many of the protests and all of that kind of thing. So being just in general concerned with environmental racism, that brings together the identities of being an environmental activist and being also a Black woman, because I can't only be concerned with the things that are happening. Of course, I care about what's happening to the earth, but I think that it's not acknowledged enough in those circles. What environmental racism in general. I mean, I've met too many environmentalists that have never heard of environmental racism, and I think that that's unacceptable. But other things is like just being a Black woman, experiencing a lot of sexism within movement spaces, and that is it's just a lot of patriarchy. So I guess maybe heterosexism is another thing. I have been I think that I had to leave one organization because women were told to wear a dress in the protest that we were having. It was like a designated dress code. They said that they wanted everyone to look uniform, so they said the women needed to wear skirts and dresses, and men need to wear this, and then the women had to march in the middle. And when we cross the street, women have to march in the middle, and the men have to march in two lines on either side of the women to protect them, and those kinds of things. I was not a huge fan of that, so I had to leave the organization because of just that internalized like patriarchy within that organization. And also just since we're talking about gender, race, class is another thing. I did not, I mean, I grew up in Cleveland and then went to Bedford later. It's very like mostly working class type of communities. So I think that just having that perspective and going to college and understanding that it's a lot of things that I didn't learn that I should have learned. Understanding that there's certain things that that I just didn't know. For example, when I was in graduate school, I learned that people have homes that they can pass down from one generation to the next, or people have trust, people have wealth that they pass down from one generation to the next. So I didn't understand that aspect of how that impacts the racial wealth gap and how the history of redlining and segregation all impacts how we are today, and then how that ends up impacting like the neighborhoods that I grew up in and the schools that I went to, and how under-resourced some of those schools were. So I think just having all of those different perspectives really made an impact. But I think that in terms of using that as a tool, that helps me to know what I should be focusing on, because now I work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion director, which is like, I haven't used to talk to high schoolers about social justice all day. So a lot of the different students who go to the school that I teach at, they reflect a similar background, very working class. There's an income limit to be able to attend the school because it's based on financial need and everything. So a lot of students are very interested in social justice. So I know I have an idea of where our conversations can go because of that. You know, I see those different blind spots that I've experienced with racism and sexism and classism within our movement, and now I can heighten their senses to that. So then when they go to college and become activists, or when they do their own movement organizing work now, they're more privy to those things that I didn't know back when I was growing up, and when I tried to kind of piece things together on my own with the help of Shamar back in the day. So that's kind of how I've come to using those different things now.
I can chime in real quick if you want. I'll give you the real quick. You know, I don't believe that I can divorce in the conversation of intersectionality, I don't believe that I can divorce my race and gender. Like they simultaneously a part of me. Every decision, every issue, every decision that I make, every issue that touches me, it's hitting me from both sides, and I'm navigating them as a Black woman. And I think intersectionality has allowed me to just become a more, how do I say it? I think I'm more deeply involved in human struggle. Like it's allowed me to really identify with so many other people's struggles and to realize that like we all bring so many individual identities to the table. And if I'm fighting for my Blackness and my womanhood, like I have to identify with you fighting for your queerness or for your ability or whatever. Like I think that intersectionality is that kaleidoscope that allows you to see the full humanity in every single individual and to contextualize why you're fighting. I think that in the movement right now, there's a really nasty fight between like whose ideas are more radical than whose. Like that like showing up, you have to like radicalism is becoming like a weapon for, I think, dividing Black sociopolitical thought in a sense. And I think that like when you talk about issues of like class and education and things like that, some people might not be able to spit this ideology and theory that we're studying in the academy, but they're living this in their daily lives. And I feel like you don't know who such and such is, or you didn't read this, or that is really, I find that pervasive in the circles that I am in. And I think that it is counterproductive to the progress that I think we want to achieve in society. And so, yeah, I guess intersectionality allows me to be more open to where other people are and their stories and their lived experience.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I really want to reach down and grab this book for our next unit class, as what we're talking about is we're going to be doing some reading about Bayard Rustin, or from Bayard Rustin, who is my favorite organizer, master organizer, to talk more about this intersectionality and these multiple identities and exactly what Amanda talked about, these in-group fights. And it kind of leads into the first question that we have in our chat box. That's talking about referring to Michaela's comment, mentioning that not necessarily considering herself or identifying as a BLM activist because she's not always or only doing organizing with a particular BLM group. But the question says, I saw a tweet the other day saying that white people have just started calling any group of Black people Black Lives Matter. And I wanted to know if, as Black women, any of you feel like your activism on separate issues have been lumped together? And have you experienced anyone assuming that since you're a Black person, that you're organizing, and since you're a Black person organizing for Black issues, then you must be a part of Black Lives Matter? So I guess that's first to Michaela, but then opening it up to anyone else who wants to respond.
Yeah, thank you for this question, because yeah, absolutely. Pretty much everything I do, people like consider it Black Lives Matter, which is like, I'm always careful because I don't want to distance myself and be like, I'm not Black Lives. I don't want to do that because it's an organization and it's those are important issues. So it's not that I want to disparage it, but at the same time, it's just the assumptions that are being made is really frustrating. I know at the law school, we organized a Zoom protest, and basically we just had all the students, instead of turning on their cameras, which is a requirement at CASE, we had them change their background to a picture of someone who was like killed by the state. And so we had everyone in the law school do that. Well, we tried to get everyone in the law school to do it. We had a really great turnout. And of course, the first thing that students said was like, well, Black Lives Matter is in our classroom and they're pushing their agenda on us and da 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 da. And it's like, well, no, like who said anything about Black Lives Matter? Like, advocating for Black lives is not necessarily the same thing as Black Lives Matter. And so it was just like kind of a mess there with that. But when I see people lumping people in that way, it's usually to discredit them. Like, it's usually not like flattering or just assuming the best. It's usually as a way to like discredit Black Lives Matter as like some kind of political organization, is what I've experienced.
From my experience, I've never been a part of the organization called Black Lives Matter, like National Black Lives Matter. I think that there's a lot of different organizations that work in defense of Black lives. So there's a lot of other, like I said, I had organized with Stop Mass Incarceration, with Ohio Student Association. Those were all like under the umbrella of we're fighting for Black lives, but I've never been a part of what is formally known as the Black Lives Matter organization, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Amanda, I saw you lean in. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in or not.
I was reading the question.
Oh.
I think that people have a confusion about what Black Lives Matter is. So like Black Lives Matter is multifaceted. It's an organizing group, right? It is a global brand. It is a hashtag. It is an ideology, right? And so like you can so I think that like what I'm hearing is like none of us are a part of the literal organizing of Black Lives Matter, but we have organized around the issues that Black Lives Matter is advocating for. We have used the hashtag, we identify with the movement. And I think that that's really central to being an organizer and to being an activist, is understanding how acutely you are involved in the movement. It would be a lie to say that like I am a part of the Black Lives Matter organizing, you know what I'm saying? And so I think we're giving space to Opal and Alicia and Patrice that like they did this, you know, and the many others, right? Like this is their shit, you know what I'm saying? And we identify with it, but we're not saying I did that, you know, with alongside them, next to them. It is their spark that continues to ignite the many movements that we're a part of, but we weren't, you know, in that initial conception. And so I think as Black Lives Matter becomes a global brand, which it is now, right? It's on the streets of every boulevard in the United States. There's a Black Lives Matter boulevard or a street art. There's going to be a lot of reconciling with what being an organizer in the Black Lives Matter movement era looks like. And you know, again, identifying the issue, but being acutely involved in that organizing looks very, very different. And it's a little messy, but Black Lives Matter was organized to be decentralized. And so we're seeing that decentralization. And as Black women, I think we're afraid to kind of like co-opt or take credit for a movement that like we did not build, but are contributing to, because everything we do in a certain way continues to push forward. If we're advocating Black lives, for Black lives, we're continuing to push the Black Lives Matter movement forward as well. So I think people need to, it might be helpful for people to research and understand how Black Lives Matter was founded, its organizational structure, its theories of change, and how now, because it is so pervasively known, that decentralization creates kind of a muddiness, but it's an organic one and an interesting one, I would say.
For sure. I think that, you know, I'm in total agreement with everything that you all have said. And it makes me think about a piece by Audre Lorde, which many of us are familiar with. You can't just rebuild you can't destroy the master's house with the master's tools, right? And so really thinking about that and being honest with ourselves as Black people living in 2020. As myself, I'm an American, like I was born here. I don't like saying it, but it's true. And so the tools that we have been given, the way that we have been socialized to disrupt and interrupt and run movements and organize, there has to be a reckoning with that. We have to understand that the way that we have been taught is we can't use that exact same thing to dismantle this system. We have to make it different. And so that's where just the BLM as a collective, as a group, as a hashtag, as Amanda was saying, all these things becomes really important. So understanding the grandioseness of this work and saying that, yes, I can identify however I want and do this work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the BLM activist, because I want to respect the people who founded it and understand that as we look at movements, particularly movements for liberation, not just in the States, but around the world, when we think about leadership, the BLM movement has been intentional around decentralizing that leadership. There are founders, yes, and we're clear on who the founders are, but there's no leader of this movement. And so that kind of forces us to reckon with the oppressor within us, within ourselves, right? Because we think that there should be a leader and there should be this committee. And that's the way that we've been taught that things get changed. And the BLM movement is doing it very differently. And I think it's important for us to understand that our purview on that is attached to whiteness, independent of how we identify. We could be Black and still have a purview of whiteness, right? And so being able to name that, call it out, and reckon with it is a part of our own personal activism, so that we can be prepared to show up to stand the line with other allies and co-conspirators. So I really love that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Great question. Next question in the chat is, let's see. What's some advice you have for people as they navigate finding their activism path and find what their role is within movements? So that's open to all panelists, and anybody can jump right in.
I can say something. I think that for one, there's sometimes a very narrow definition of activism. When I was first trying to figure that question out, I was usually steered in the direction of, oh, you can go work for a nonprofit, or oh, you can just be an professional career organizer. And I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I've met so many medical doctors, dentists, lawyers, people who are not career organizers, if that makes sense, who do this kind of work, and they're within their own spheres of influence, doing what they're good at doing and doing what they're passionate about. And they're advocating within their own spaces for Black lives, right? They're advocating in the social work field. I was just in a webinar with a licensed clinical counselor and an MD, and they're talking about how Black communities can become healed from centuries and centuries of systemic racism. So I think you can get into activism however you need to. I think also just determining what are you good at and what needs need to be met, and those don't always have to be the same thing. So I used to always say, oh, well, this needs to happen. There needs to be somebody that's doing, frontline work. There needs to be somebody, and I tried to do all of those different things at the same time, and that didn't work because that's not my role. I'm not strong in all of those areas, and I don't necessarily have the energy or the strength or the time to do all of those different things. But then I started seeing there's other people who are doing these different things, who have these different competencies. So I would just say, whatever you're good at, whatever you're passionate about, find a way to advocate for racial justice within that framework. Also, just in your everyday life as a student, a parent, a friend, a teacher, whatever you are, you can continue to advocate for that. It doesn't even just have to be related to your career. But even thinking about people who own businesses or who may own, there's a Black owned spa in Columbus where I'm at, and that could be seen as, oh well, that's just a spa. Like, what does that have to do with racial justice? But that's actually like creating a safe space for women of color who don't usually have that safe space. You know, there's somebody here that has a co-working space and for specifically for women of color, those types of things. Like, you wouldn't just think, oh, her co-working space, that doesn't have anything to do with social justice. But even just in the act of creating those spaces, that is movement work, you know. So I think that we can diversify the way that we view activism and that we view movement work. It can look however it matches your strengths and the things that you care about.
One thing I would add is maybe to spend some time to get the layout of wherever you are and try to notice, observe the work that's being done and who's already in the space, who's doing what. And I think even just showing up as a participant or when there's a call for stuff, just not it's not being passive, but it's sort of like giving deference to the people that are already in those spaces. I think for me that has helped me kind of get to know what's going on before you just start you know doing whatever. And the other thing is to kind of meet people, and even outside of like the context of organizing, I think just getting to know who is in your community is inherently valuable, and learning what their skills are, what their interests are, what their struggles are. That's going to be helpful if, later on as time progresses, then you're going to be organizing those people in your community. And then as Dr. Ragland was saying, I think also recognizing your skills and what you potentially have to offer, if it's not, even if you wouldn't naturally consider it something that is activism, like if you're a good writer, or if you I don't know, if art or something like that can be in service of the movement, it's going to look different for everyone. A lot of times those different skills are what's needed, and can be really helpful. So that's what I would say.
Yes, it reminds me of a John Lewis quote, one of his quotes from his book, Walking with the Wind, his memoir. He says, find your passion and get in the way. And so I feel like that's what we've heard from Dr. Rabbs and also from Michaela. Amanda.
I would say, don't be afraid to fail. Like, when you go into scenarios and situations, know that you might not get the best outcome, right? Be strategic, plan, organize. And, I think you really have to set goals and expectations for what is a win and what is a loss worth taking. I think that, back to the conversation of intersectionality, bring your full self to the table. There is a level of performance and activism. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying, there's different ways that you're going to show up. But one of the ways that I showed up early on was minimizing parts of my identity. So I wasn't being intersectional. I was just being Black. Like that was the thing. And I think that when I didn't show up, I was showing up for other people's pain, but I wasn't allowing other people to show up for my pain, and because I was not bringing my full self to the table. And so now in every space and every circle that I move in as an activist, I am thinking about not only being of service to others, but what I truly believe will be progress for myself. And bringing my full self to the table has helped that tremendously, and has helped me build stronger and more organic relationships amongst the people that I am organizing with. Michaela made a great point about, being deferential and showing up and learning. Like, I will never forget, I was at a social justice teach-in that Dr. Rhonda Williams was doing. And it was about like 6 or 7 people because it was February and cold and snowy. And I remember we were talking about the moment. We were talking about, the Department of Justice was coming in and building police accountability or under the consent decree. And we were talking about it and we were talking about it. And I kind of said, well, all this talk isn't doing anything. And I kind of made that smart ass comment to Dr. Rhonda, who had been doing this for decades. And she kind of was like, huh? She's like, well, what have you done? Like, excuse me, like, you real hot-headed right now. Like, what have you done? And I just remember like that conversation, it burned a little bit, but that really did get me from like this theory, this internal feeling to actually organizing and actually putting myself in situations where I could tangibly impact change. And so if I hadn't have gone to that teach-in, and if I then didn't say, hey, Dr. Rhonda, I know you just burned me real bad, but can I intern for you for the summer because I want to learn from you? If I didn't do that, I don't think that I would be nearly as insightful as I am now. That learning process is fundamental. You have to be a constant student of this work in order to do the work well.
Shout out to Dr. Rhonda and the Social Justice Institute. It is their 10th anniversary this weekend. Happy anniversary, SJI. We have all taken so much from the work that you've put out into the community. All right, I want to transition. We have a question in our Facebook chat. And this one says, how have your social relationships shifted as your activism has grown? Just to be real clear about time, we have maybe about 25 minutes left. So, and we have probably about 5 or 6 more questions. So we'll have one person kind of answer each question, unless you really, really, really want to jump in and add something. But I want to make sure that we can answer all the questions that are in the chats. So this one is, how have your social relationships shifted as your activism has grown?
I would say my circle got smaller, but my heart got bigger. Like I don't be around everybody like that. But I love you, and I support your struggle and your movement, and like I am the type of person that will like show up and support, and truly when I'm there, I'll be 100% there. But like I'm not around a lot of people because I have to preserve my energy, and I just also I know that I'm dedicated to the work, and there's just not a lot of space for anything other than that. So I don't know if that really answers it, but that's the truth.
I think that answered it. You have to protect yourself, right? Protecting your energy and setting your boundaries. That becomes really important. Just to add to what Amanda said about the physicality of it, it's 2020. Our world is very sophisticated. They're listening to us right now. We can see the reports of COINTELPRO come out right now. There's some in this book, right? They're listening. And so we've got to understand that and adjust accordingly. Okay, next question is actually going to come from a student. Dante, I'm going to go ahead and turn your camera on and you can come on and ask your question.
Thank you, Doctor. First of all, having the privilege of listening to all of you wonderful activists during this class has truly been a privilege. It's one of the reasons why I chose to take this class in the fall. I'm somebody who's always been a supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't deserve any brownie points for that, but and I'm not looking for any, but I've always understood the purpose of this movement. And there's a lot of people where I'm from Youngstown, Ohio. And even though Youngstown, Ohio in the area is relatively diverse, it has a high African-American population. At the same time, there's these surrounding suburbs that that have certain ones are diverse, some are not, but it's a place where I've noticed there's a lot of people who really oppose the Black Lives Matter movement, and they oppose racial justice, but then they claim that they have love in their hearts and they're not racist, and that really troubles me. And certain members of my family, unfortunately, have that belief. You know, they just they criticize people like Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice and say their shootings are justified, but then they say that, you know, they're not racist. They go to a church that has black people at their church and they think that's okay. And that really personally troubles me. And a lot of people I'm noticing, to get to my question, they all have this collective belief that it's morally correct to believe in the fact that, you know, just civil rights are bad. They like Martin Luther King and that's it, and it shouldn't get any farther than really what Martin Luther King and John Lewis, the late John Lewis, were able to accomplish, and that's it. Black people should just be accepting. And matter of fact, recently, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this chairwoman of Trump supporters in Mahoning County who made national news for saying in a Guardian interview in 2016 that I don't know if you guys remember this, but she said basically, if you're not successful and you're black in America, it's your own fault, and also spewing other things like, you know, black people don't maintain their property. She's also a real estate tycoon in the Youngstown area. And she said all these very, very, you know, horrible, horrible things about black people. And it just perpetuated the stereotype that a lot of his supporters are racially insensitive and racist. So I'm asking you, how do you deal with people who believe it's morally correct to believe that the Black Lives Matter movement is ridiculous? Like, how do you deal with those people who believe it's morally and righteous to believe that? That's my question.
I guess so. My first thought is like, I don't deal with people like that, and like, not, it's like I don't allow them into my space. Like, I don't think about you. I don't address your concerns. Like, I don't really acknowledge your concerns. Like, I think I spend more of my time like in an adversarial way with maybe like white liberals, like people who are well-intentioned and possibly like could be like really helpful, but for whatever and they want to be helpful, but for whatever reason, like there's things they need to learn. Like, I think I spend more time in that space. But like the type of person that you're describing, like I don't know. I like don't even have a framework for that. I don't interact with you. Like, if you're an elected official, I'll work to try to get you out of your position. Or if you're in a position of power, I think most of my energy would be trying to erode that power, get you out of that position. But that's all that comes to mind for me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question, Dante. Thank you for your response, Michaela. I want to move on to the next question just to be mindful of our time, but thank you so much, Dante. So the next question is from our live stream on Facebook. Do you think being in a named movement such as BLM is an easier way to deliver your voice? Or it might affect you if there's something related to conflict, or some components will say it's destroying society as well. So I'll try that again. Do you think that being in a named movement such as Black Lives Matter is an easier way to deliver your voice? Or do you feel that it may affect you as negative because of the reputation of the movement and how sometimes there's often conflict and in-group fighting, as we were kind of talking about earlier? So that's open to anyone.
Okay, I don't know if I'm actually, this is going to actually answer the question, but so I was talking to Bakari Katwana. I don't know if you know Bakari, but he's an activist and hip hop scholar, and he says, you know, that Black Lives Matter is a generational impulse, like the Black Power movement, like the civil rights movement, right? They're generational impulses. They're what we believe at this moment in time and are identifying with collectively. And so there's a power in that collective impulse. There's a power in we're all moving and this is the machine that's helping it go. But I think that, like, again, with the growing sort of global brand of Black Lives Matter and the decentralization, we have to be very strategic about how we're communicating it so it doesn't get lost in the noise, and that it doesn't, I think, yeah, I think that, like, for the specific issue that you're advocating for, don't just rely on, like, the Black Lives Matter momentum to get to handle that issue, or to activate around that issue. Like, I think that people are just aligning with Black Lives Matter to a certain degree out of convenience. And, like, I think we more need to align with it as, like, a generational impulse, and as something that is a guiding light, but is not the only thing.
Awesome, thank you for that. We'll move to the next question, and that is a question from one of our students who's in our Zoom. Maddie, if you want to turn on your camera and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, so I feel like being on a college campus, maybe not right now because we can barely leave our houses, but it's a really wonderful place for activism. You know, there you can find a group for like every issue. You know, we have Students for Justice in Palestine, we have BUS, we have like all of these like Students Against Sweatshops. And I have found it like easier to connect with activists and kind of like coalition build on campus. And the idea of like leaving a campus and trying to continue activism is a little bit like scary to me. Like, I don't know where to start. So I guess for any of you who have, who started as student activists and then, continued your activism off campus, like, where do you recommend going to kind of find like that home for activism, and like, how did you come to where you are?
Can you, Maddie, Kelly, can you repeat the last part of, Maddie, sorry, can you please repeat the last part of that question one more time? Just to make sure.
So, for the people who have kind of like started as student activists and then moved off campus, where, like, how did you find your sort of home for activism? Where do you recommend, like, what do you recommend doing to kind of look for activist kind of groups outside of campuses?
I have had a lot of struggles with that before. So I think that there's a lot of, I would just say community organizations, especially right now, because a lot of my organizing was definitely geared toward campus. And then it was a little bit more difficult to find those spaces where there's activists who are adults who are graduated from college. I believe that I found those spaces through certain events and conferences. I found them through going to like organizing trainings. That's how I went to a week-long training in Cincinnati through the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. And that's an annual thing. And it introduced me to a lot of friends that I have now. And it introduced me to one of the main organizing groups that I actually participated in. So I think that just figuring out what those spaces are, if you are able to go to events right now, pretty much everything is virtual, but if you can figure out a way to see who is on or in these events and connect with them and see where they're doing work, how can you get involved? Or if there are any community organizations that aren't directly college campus related, I think that that would be a really good starting point. It may take some more time because everything is just so readily available when it's on a college campus. But there are people out in the community doing the work. It's just a matter of finding them. You may even be able to use Facebook, social media, those kinds of things, to figure it out. But they do exist. But I do feel that it's not quite as, it's not quite as easy when it's outside of college. But
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Ragland. And thank you, Maddie, for your question. Thank you. So we have one question, our last question from the Facebook live stream. And because it's our last question and because of the question, I do want to open it up to all of the panelists. I know that these responses are very unique and individualized. So the question is, how do you take care of your mental health and avoid becoming emotionally drained while playing huge roles as activists and organizers? So how are y'all taking care of yourselves? Your mental health, I just want to add maybe your physical health too, because that's important. We have to be fit for the struggle. So anyone can start.
I think for me, I think when things get really stressful, like sometimes I tend to withdraw. So like a big part of my self-care is connecting with people and connecting, with, people like Shamara or Dr. Arki, sorry, and Amanda. And, I kind of have people that I go to, and to have that ready to go, that when things are rough, you have those people. I think that's important. The pandemic has just been rough. Like it's been rough in general. And like, I think the normal challenges that come with this work have been exacerbated by the limitations of, practicing social distancing and things like that. But, and I think reading and kind of having, I like to have kind of, I guess I consider heroes and people that I turn to. I know Dr. Aki mentioned Audre Lorde, and sometimes I just like read, just read some of my favorite passages, because a lot of times, but most of the time, people like, there's nothing new. Like pretty much every struggle I have had, like someone has had it before, someone has dealt with it, especially reading Black women, other Black women, they've experienced it too. So that's kind of mostly what I turn to. I go on walks. I also participate in, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Girl Trek, but they're trying to get, I think, 1 million Black women up and walking. And so they have a walk and talk podcast that I've been doing, which is really fun. So yeah, that's about it.
For me, it definitely looked like taking a step back when needed. I think that now, especially after like having kids and everything, is definitely different. But I have to have enough energy to deal with them and to deal with work and everything else too. So I definitely have to be wise and conscious about where that energy is spent. And the biggest part for me has been not feeling bad about taking care of myself. I know that doesn't directly answer the question, but I had a conversation with some of my really, really good friends that I've met because of activism, all Black women. And we were talking about the current iterations of marches and things like I had just had my second baby when a lot of that stuff was happening, and it's still happening right now, but when it was really, really when it was really, really prominent. So I basically we all had a conversation about that and just how it felt to not be out there at that time. And we affirmed each other in it is okay, like in the fact that the things that we have done previously, regardless of if it was a couple years ago, have laid the groundwork for the current people who are out there marching right now. So I think that just feeling like it's okay not to be at every single protest, and it's okay to take some time to be with my family, those things and those affirmations have helped a lot, because there is a certain level of guilt that can eventually come from, oh, I should have been there. Oh, I should be there. The movement is going to be there. And we have to be able to join it in different ways and also maintain our own energy and also stay alive, because I can't rejoin the movement if I'm, out here not taking care of myself to the point that I'm totally out of commission. So.
Yeah, I think that I'm really lucky because my job and daily practice is making art, and I'm a cultural organizer, and so I have a constant cathartic process and release through my work and practice. And I know that, like, for instance, being a lawyer, so I went to law school, I know that there's not that release in an everyday law practice. So by the nature of the work that I do, I have that. Because I'm always connected to spirit, and I'm always, kind of connected to I say higher vibrations. I think self-care, connecting with Michaela and Shamara, of course, and the many other Black women in Cleveland who are simultaneously leading movement and holding each other down. And then I think just like, you cannot discount the credit of faith. You cannot discount the credit of dreaming and believing and goal setting. And each and every day, just to see my goals being reached incrementally, it helps with the care, because it centers me and I'm doing the right thing. Now, I will say that I work way too much, and I could get better at that, but I do. I am more conscious about how I'm showing up for myself so that I can show up for others even better.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you for responding to that question. But before we move on, I'm going to do what I always do, which is not on the program. And I'm just going to say to each of our panelists, as you can tell, we have our individual relationships, is that you all are dope. And the work that you are doing every day is inspiring so many people. I talk about you and your work, i.e. this panel, but also the intergenerational mentoring that we have, the things that I learn from you, the things that you teach me. And I also just want to say to Dr. Ragland, your work is raising those boys. As a mom of 2 Black boys to another mom of 2 Black boys, that is the ultimate service and the ultimate sacrifice. And it took me probably about a good 5 years of being a mom to really center in on that and to really understand it, because I had to do my own work as an activist and realize that, even though I'm not out there all the time, is that because I'm here with them, making sure that they have the things that they need. And they are watching you. They are watching you. They are watching you. And that is, a key way in which your word goes out into the world and is multiplied. So I want to tell each of you, thank you. I want to tell you, thank you for joining us today, but thank you so much for the work that you're doing in community, and keep going. And keep going. It gets hard. We all want to stop. Feel that in that day, we have to feel it. And then the next day, get up and keep going and go back at it. So thank you again. Thank you to those of us who have joined us on the live stream. Thank you to all of my students who are here and participating. The last thing that I'll ask our panelists to do is shout out their socials so you can know where to find them, starting with Dr. Ragland.
Oh, I do not usually use social media, but
or your website if you don't have a social. How can
okay.
they get you?
I'm most readily available on LinkedIn. That's usually the social that I use. I also have a website. It's I can just put it into the chat, but it's teachliberation.com, and it's a collective that just recently started, where we will help other people understand liberation. And I will put that into the chat.
I'm uninteresting, so don't follow me on social media. Follow Shooting Without Bullets and visit shootingwithoutbullets.org.
Yeah, I don't really have established social media. I mean, you can find me on Facebook just under my first and last name, and I would add people, but I don't really. There's really nothing to see but family pictures there. But I'm also I'm the president of the Black Law Students Association, and our social media is actually really cool. So check us out at BOLSA CWRU, and yeah, that's just our handle, BLSA CWRU. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you again. If you can drop those in the chat so folks will have them, I'll make sure to drop them on the live stream. And thank you all again so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.